What if I told you that there's a paint out there that has excellent coverage, creates smooth blends, always has the right consistency on the palette, and even helps you in your knowledge of color theory and color mixing? It sounds almost too good to be true, right? So why aren't everyone using this amazing paint? Well, I think the reason why people aren't using oil paints is because of some very basic misunderstandings or misassumptions about the medium. So in this video, I'll take out to clear some of these misconceptions and show you exactly just what is possible with the oil paints as we dive into painting the Corvus Cabal warband. I'll take you through the painting of 2 of the figures from the warband. If you want to see more of this video and see more of how I painted the warband, be sure to check out my Patreon, where you can find an extended edit of this video where I focus on how I painted 4 of the figures in the warband. And by the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to take advantage of the oil paints and level up your miniature painting. Now, let's get started. The first misunderstanding about oil paints is that they're hard to get into, or that it's a really big investment. And okay, yes, granted, some of the oil paints are more expensive than the Citadel paints. Now what we have to consider with the oil paints is that we're getting a larger quantity per tube. This would bring the price per gram down to this. So if we compare the cost to the regular Citadel paints, or maybe even the contrast paints, we can see that they aren't actually that much more expensive. And even further, with the oil paints, we're only going to need a few basic tubes. I'll talk more about the exact products that I recommend later in this video. We also have to remember that really high quality oil paints are going to last you a lifetime. Other than the paints, we're also going to need some white spirit, thinner, or dilutant. This comes in small bottles like this, or in much bigger bottles like this one. The main difference between the two is that, of course, this one is cheaper per milliliter, but also has a very, very strong odor, whereas the smaller bottles generally are odorless and they consist of higher grade artist quality thinner. Both of these are absolutely fine. We're going to be using very small quantities, so I would recommend getting a smaller bottle if you're just starting out. Either way, a spirit of dilutant or thinner is going to last you for quite a while. For the palette, we can use basically any hard flat surface. I use this metal box and that works absolutely fine. We'll also need some paper towels to keep our workplace tidy and storing our dirty brushes, and also for wiping off some of the excess paint that are already on the brushes. With the acrylics, we're spending quite a bit of money on expensive brushes, whereas with the oil paints, we can really use whatever we have lying around. Don't use your nice fancy Kolinsky brushes for the oils, just use cheap synthetic ones, and we'll see a little bit later on in this video how we can use basically any brush to paint literally anything with the oils. Be sure to keep all your Kolinsky brushes that have lost their tip, as these really have an excellent purpose to serve with the oil painting. The second misconception about oil paints is that the drying time takes forever. And while it's true that some canvas painters like to store their paintings for weeks and weeks to make sure that everything is completely dry and set, it's not going to be the case for us when we're painting miniatures. We're painting again with much smaller quantities of paint. The drying time of the oils is going to be affected by your local climate, your humidity, and how much fresh air the oils are exposed to, and probably most importantly, the layer thickness. In my experience, the oils usually dry within a day or two, and if we want them to dry quicker, even overnight, we can use some medium that I'll talk about later in the video. The third and probably biggest misconception about the oil paints is that they're very difficult to use. And another variation of this misunderstanding that I see all the time is that oils are great for smoothness, but they really aren't that great for painting details or making sharpness. And listen, all beginnings are hard. So if you've been using acrylics for a few years, then don't expect your oil painting miniatures to look the exact same in the very beginning. I know that the first few miniatures that I painted with the oils certainly did not look anything like the stuff I could do with acrylics at the time. And I think here is where we have to really set aside our egos and embrace the journey of learning. Embrace being a beginner again, because you know what they say.
Dude, sucking at something is the first step towards being sorta good at something.
Thanks, Jake. So just to show you exactly what's possible with the oils, I'll be painting this Corvus Cabal warband, and it's my first time painting on the 28mm scale with the oils. For this paint job, I'm spending about 1 hour on each model and a little over 2 hours on the biggest guy in the crew. And mind you that this painting was done while streaming on Twitch, so this means that I'm taking breaks to talk with chat, interact, and really I'm not overly focused on speed or anything like that. Yeah, it's not you guys. Appreciate it though, but you certainly could make some sort of speed painting system out of the oils if that's what you wanted to. Let me know if you want to see a video about that. This is not some super efficient speed painting system, rather it's just me making the most of the tools at my disposal. And by the way, if you want to join that Twitch stream, there's a link for that in the description. So, just to show you how easy and fast oils can be, let me take you through the painting of this warband. Quick and easy. Let's start. So the very first step in this painting method is to make a oil wash. So we take some of the dilutant and the Prussian blue, and here we're just rubbing it all over the model. You want to make sure that this goes into all the deepest crevices and all the places that are going to be very hard to reach. So essentially this is like making an oil wash, but instead of doing it at the very end of the painting, we're now doing it at the very beginning. This method is coined as a pre-glaze from James Wapple. So after the wash is set for a bit, we're going to go in and wipe it off with some white spirit, just using a regular brush like this. You could also use a makeup sponge or a cotton swab or something like that. So this is a result of the pre-glaze or oil wash. So painting the first guy, I'm starting off using these cooler green tones. This is a mixture of the Prussian blue and a little bit of the Indian yellow. Here I'm changing over to a little bit of a warmer, brownish, desaturated yellow color that you can see. And just picking out some of the details and marking where I think the stronger light would be. And again, I'm not too concerned with particular colors of different materials as of yet. Right now I'm just trying to block in sort of the lighter areas and distinguish them from the darker areas of the model. And here we're seeing stronger additions of Indian yellow. So I really want to try to create some focal point around the beak and the face of the model using the strong yellow tones here. Here I'm coming in with like a different accent color, the red, to try to pick out some of the other details on the model that are going to contrast a little bit more with the greener, colder tones that are everywhere else. So the red can go on some of these feathers and on some of the leather details as well. This is going to add some warmth to the model that was otherwise pretty cold. So what I'm hoping to show you is just how many different paint jobs are very easy to create with the painting, and we can do this just by adding in different amounts of the same colors. So the ambience on this piece here is going to be slightly colder than the ambience on some of the other pieces. This is because I'm starting with that base of the colder green that you saw in the very beginning there. Here we're making sort of a colder ivory color that has a little bit of magenta in it. This is going to function as highlighting for many different surfaces, and it's going to mix as we apply the paint to the surface. So as you can see, the oils kind of stay wet throughout the entire painting process, which is what makes it so easy to put down a few colors and then switch over to a blending brush where we can then blend the wet paint on the model itself very effortlessly. We're coming in with some of the brightest lights for the non-metallic metal pieces. And one of the things that really surprised me was just how easy it is to get these smooth transitions, just as you can see here, how few brush strokes it actually takes to create non-metallic metal. So I'm putting down the color and then I'm going in and blending it, and already we have effortless midtones. Are you seeing what I'm seeing here? I mean, come on. Here we can put in some sort of reflection from the hood of the figure. So we're adding in some of the green yellow tones on the sword. and picking out some more details that are facing upward and would be catching the most of the light. For the fur, I'm kind of just dry brushing on some color, and this dry brushing technique is quite common with the oil painting for me. Just leaving very small amount of paint on the surface and letting it mix. See, naturally have a much stronger transparency than the acrylics, and this can really help us to be able to create some cool effects in very few brush strokes. And again, more touching up of the final highlights as I'm constantly working back and forth between these different lights and blending them out. So this is a general workflow when we're working with oils, is to have a brush that you use for painting and brushes that you use for blending. And as you can see, I'm not blending all the time. I am focusing on putting down paint, and then I'll come in and blend in the very end of the painting. And from there we can go back and forth and adjust, but it really is not necessary to start blending at the very beginning of the painting just yet. The final detail on the piece is this crow that sits up here, and here I'm just working in some brighter tones and coming in with some of the darker blue midtones. And again, we can see how these different layers of wet paint kind of blend together as we're adding them on top of each other. Here we're coming in and actually doing the blending on the hood. The old Klinsky sable brushes are excellent for this purpose. So by now you should be pretty convinced that the oils are quite cool. And if you're ready to go pick up some for yourself, this leads us to misunderstanding number 4 about the oil paints, which is a lack of information on what to get and what is suited for miniatures. So think about how many tutorials or painting content videos you've seen that utilizes the Vallejo or Citadel ranges, and think about how few you've seen that actually uses oil paints. So if you're interested in getting started with the oil painting, let me put together a palette which would be the most basic palette that I would buy if I were to start from scratch with the oils. I would get Naphthol Red from Gamblin, Indian Yellow from Williamsburg, and Ultramarine Blue from Schminke. I would of course also buy Titanium White and some Lamp Black. I'll include links for all of these paints down in the description, along with the mediums I recommend. These are Amazon affiliate links, which means that if you buy them, I get a small kickback at no extra cost to you. This is an excellent way to support me and the channel. Really, I found that any odorless dilutant will do, and I'd also pick up a bit of Winsor & Newton liquid, which is a medium for speeding up the drying time. Mind you, we only need 10 to 20% of medium to the total amount of paint. So it's very easy to use too much of the medium. I'll also have to give a special shout out to James Wapple, who recommended this palette to me, and I've really found that the Indian Yellow especially works wonders. You'll probably find a lot of people recommend the cadmium colors, such as the cadmium red and the cadmium yellow for the primaries. The reasoning for not picking these colors is that the cadmium generally have a much longer drying time, and some of them can also be toxic. Not to mention that the Naphthol Red and Indian Yellow are also cheaper. If the brands and the paints I've mentioned here are a bit out of your budget, I think a really good alternative is to get the Winsor & Newton Winton series. These paints are available everywhere and they're fairly cheap. However, the quality is just not the same. This may cause you to have some frustrating experiences with the medium and ultimately turn you away from all the paints. So this is not what I recommend. So I'd rather recommend that you spend 20 bucks on a tube of paint that you'll love, rather than you spend 10 to 15 bucks on a tube of paint that doesn't really work for you and that you won't end up using anyway. Talking about different brands and pigments is a whole discussion in and of itself, and probably something that belongs in another video. So maybe I'll make that. Let's get back to painting the final miniature in the Corvus Cabal set. So at this point I've painted all but this last model, and I have probably a bit stronger idea in my head of what I want the whole gang to look like and what the expression of this character should be. So I'm starting with this sort of rainbow idea for the wings, sort of like something very exotic looking, or something that feels a little bit more like maybe a parrot than a raven. So we're blocking in some of these brighter green tones that we've been using throughout the entire warband as sort of our main focal color here. This color will go both on the wings and on the hood of the piece. The inside of the wings can have some of that cold green that we were working with on the very first character that we painted. This is just a combination of the cobalt turquoise and maybe a little bit of the cerulean blue as well. We can use this shift between colder and warmer greens really to make some sort of interesting contrast in the piece and draw attention to the warmer greens by having the colder greens be behind them, either on the inside of the wings or on the far part of the cloth that sits around the head. So I find it very creatively inspiring to think about different materials as not having a set in stone color, but instead using these different colors all across the piece and making these different combinations a bit more intuitively and less bound by sort of the dogmas of realism. And here I'm making sort of a bright orange highlightish yellow color that really probably is much too bright and probably too desaturated, and we'll see how I make these adjustments for that a little bit later on in the painting. And at this point I've decided to add in some more of the red, and you can see that I painted the feathers on the middle of the head red as well as accenting some of these tips of the wings to have more of the warmer red in it. This way we have the total temperature shift from the cold greens all the way to the warm reds in the wings themselves. With the red beak, we're also seeing that it kind of looks like Kellogg's.
They're the same picture.
So this is really something that I would like to change. And changing it is rather simple. It is just a simple matter of taking some white spirit and brushing off the red paint where you don't want it, and then repainting that area with something else. We could of course also mix something different into the red to try to change the hue that way. And here you see me cleaning off that red that I was talking about. We're picking out some of the sharper details, such as these talons, and here we can use really any bright tone we want to, as this is supposed to have sort of a non-metallic metal feel, and I'm just using this brighter yellow tone because I think it captures like a lot of attention quite nicely. And really, for the wings, we're really seeing how we can utilize the oils. Even though we're not using super sharp brushes, we can really utilize sort of the natural gravity of the oils to paint in textures or details, even though the paint doesn't flow from the brush the same way that we're used to when we're using the acrylics. So as long as we have a loaded brush with paint, we can still make fine lines and textures just as you're seeing here to try to draw out some of those individual hairs on each of the feathers. And here it's important to think about the thickness of the paint, since it's kind of a dogma in the oil painting world that thicker paint will stick to thinner layers and vice versa. So if we have down a thin layer like I have here, I make sure that the paint on the brush is thick, and we're disposing quite a thicker layer in order for it to stick very nicely to the surface that we're painting on. Here we're working with a thinner layer just to get that sort of dry brushing motion in again. I also decided that the highlight on the hood looked a little bit strange, so I'm going in with some of the Prussian blue that we have in the shadows of the pre-glaze and starting to dim down some of this highlight a little bit to make the material feel more green and less yellow. And we're just picking up the blending brush just to ease out some of the different transitions between colors. And the blending brush can also pick up some of the colors that it's mixing, and then those colors can kind of go all over the model as we're moving around the piece. So here you'll see how some of the yellow tones will warm up some of the colder greens that we have. Once that happens, I make sure to go to the paper towel and wipe off the blending brush to have something that's more clean and not have that staining effect happening all over the model. So the soft Kolinsky brushes do a very, very nice job in blending these smaller surfaces. And again, these are just old discarded brushes that I thought were worthless since I couldn't use them for acrylic detail anymore, but they still have very much a purpose in my collection of brushes I found with the oils. Since we can either wipe them on the surface and pull little lines to create texture, or we can simply just tap them on top of the surface to make more of a very, very soft stippling motion that again blends the colors together and makes seamless transitions. Here we can think about that cylinder shape that really is the leg that comes down here, and the lower part of it especially should have some highlight. And again, this is very simple to just dry brush on some small amounts of paint, and then we can blend them in and get these, pick out the details very nicely on the finer details of the sculpt. At this point, we're adding in a more saturated orange to kind of drag even more attention out to the wings of the figure. And again, even though the brush is loaded with paint, it's very, very easy to put on some small amounts on the figure because of just how the paint doesn't flow from the brush in the same way that acrylics do. And since we added the darker tone, we're going in with the highlight again to build more texture. We can also start to pick out some of the tops of the feathers to create some edge highlighting. Or these kind of central parts of the feathers, the spine that runs down the feather itself. These can also catch a little bit stronger light. Again, we can highlight with the same tone all across these different colors that are on the wings, and still, because the color mix on the surface, still get that feeling of continuity or the sort of a semblance and ambience across different colors and materials on the piece. So you can probably tell by the footage that the wings were really my main focus for this figure. From here, all there's left to do is to do the basing, and then the miniatures are done. I really hope that this video has inspired you to try oil painting for yourself. If you want to see how I use this medium on a bigger scale, you can go ahead and click the video right up here. I also have a Patreon where I show longer edits of the videos, and you'll get to see how I painted a few others of the figures in the lineup of the Corvus Cabal miniatures here. I also offer private coaching and more. There's a link for that down in the description. Thank you for watching, and happy painting. Naphtha red, Indian yellow, and ultramarine blue. Naphtha red, Indian yellow, ultramarine blue. Naphtha red, Indian yellow, and ultramarine blue.